Hello, and welcome to this week's mini Bible studies series as we prepare for Sunday, February 14th, 2021, which is called the Transfiguration of our Lord. And I want to start out this week by reading the introduction to the bulletin that is for that Sunday, and help us kind of get a flavor for where these readings are going and why. So the introduction says, the Sundays after Epiphany began with Jesus' baptism and end with three disciples' vision of his transfiguration. In Mark's story of Jesus' baptism, apparently only Jesus sees the Spirit descending and hears the words from heaven. But now the three closest friends hear the same words, naming him God's beloved. As believers, Paul writes, we are enabled to see the God light in Jesus' face, because the same God who created light in the first place has shone in our hearts to give us that vision. The light of God's glory in Jesus has enlightened us through baptism and shines in us also for others to see. So today we use the first reading for Transfiguration Sunday, which comes from the second book of Kings, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. So let me read for you the introduction to that reading and the reading itself, and then share some reflections that I've gathered for this morning. Today's reading centers on the transfer of power and authority from the prophet Elijah to Elisha. Their travels, which retrace the path of Joshua back to Moab, the place where Moses died, and the parting of the waters, demonstrate that Elisha and Elijah are legitimate successors of the great prophet Moses. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha says, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other, until the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. Here ends the reading. Excuse me. Everything in today's reading needs to be read in light of the end of the story, which tells us that Israel is experiencing a moment of great transition in this transfer of prophetic power from Elijah to Elisha. This story is about more than two individuals. The transfer of prophetic power from Elijah to Elisha is significant for all of Israel. Elisha becomes the chosen one of God to become the great prophet of Israel. The bands of prophets at each city, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, they all appear to understand the events that are leading up to this transition. In the original Hebrew, their statement to Elisha has a bit of a double edge. The Hebrew would actually read more like, "Do you know that today the Lord is taking your master from over your head?" By the end of the story, Elijah will no longer be the head over the prophets, and especially over the disciple Elisha. Yet, such a phrase is more than metaphorical in that Elijah will in fact be taken over the head of Elisha in the whirlwind. On the way to crossing the Jordan River, Elijah parts the Jordan, bringing to mind the activities of Moses at the Red Sea. Elijah rolls up his mantle and suggesting that the reader imagine Moses' rod as he struck the river. When Elijah strikes the water is parted, and he and Elisha walk through on dry land. So having departed from Jericho, having crossed over the Jordan River, they now stand literally in the region where Moses had died. Just as Moses died opposite Jericho with Joshua, prepared to lead the people into the promised land, so too is Elijah taken up, with Elisha prepared to return to the land and lead the people. Before Elijah is taken up in a whirlwind into heaven, Elisha asks for a hard thing: to receive a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Elisha is using inheritance language here, which states that the rightful heir receives a double portion of the inheritance. At this point, Elisha has given up in his efforts to hold on to Elijah, to keep him here, as he had earlier stated he would not leave him when they traveled to Gilgal and Bethel and Jericho. So now as they stand on the other side of the Jordan, perhaps things look differently from there. Perhaps Elisha now sees that his task is not one of holding on to Elijah, rather it is one of accepting the call of God to carry on the mission to Israel. The separation was no doubt a grievous moment for Elisha. He rips his garments in two, a symbol of mourning. Even while dealing with his mourning, however, Elisha takes up the mantle that Elijah has laid upon him and carries on with the mission of God. This story is not about what happened to Elijah, although it's certainly more entertaining to think about the chariot of fire and the horses of fire in the whirlwind. This story is about what happens to the prophetic voice of God, which is carried on by Elisha and has been carried on by figures like Elijah. So the story suggests that the prophetic voice, the office of the prophet, does not end with the death or even the ascension of one particular figure. Rather, it is available for all to choose to carry on in that tradition. In some sense, there is encouragement in this story for anyone who has felt the call of God on their lives. The encouragement is that God's presence provides a security for the one who answers God's call to pick up the mantle and to carry on with the mission. These circumstances and this promise are not limited to the stories from what we call the Old Testament or limited to the stories from what we call the New Testament. The voices of the prophets are rare these days, not because all of the prophets have ascended into the heavens, rather because few people choose to hear the call, and fewer still choose to live as though it has changed us. People and communities of faith are presented with God's call in every generation. God's kingdom has participants, not spectators. Thank you for joining me today as we prepare for the Transfiguration of our Lord Sunday, February 14th, 2021. I hope you are having a great day. Take care. God bless.